What if the love of your life came back years later? But had you already learned to live without it? Hi, I'm Yuna, and I welcome you to Happiness of Love. Get ready for an exciting story that will leave you amazed. Enjoy the video, and may God bless you and your entire family. Have an amazing day. Ethan Carter triggered furiously on the keyboard, his eyes spiked on the monitor while the city abroad pulsed into neon. Skyline's reflection on her office's impeccable glasses contrast with the inner chaos he barely recognized in himself. Everything needed to be efficient, predictable under its control. He ran a hand over his dark hair, exuding impatience when the phone rang. Logan Parker entered without beating, already knowing that Ethan would ignore the call. "You need to stop." Living like this, Logan threw himself into the leather armchair in front of his table. Ethan kept typing, without lifting his eyes. "I need to close the contract with the London investors. If you came to distract me, you can leave." Logan snorted. "You are always closing a contract, Ethan. Always in a meeting. Always with the mind elsewhere. When was the last time you did something for pleasure?" Silence. The noise of the keyboard ceased. Logan laughed. "Exactly. You don't know how to answer." Ethan reclined in the chair, massaging the temples. "And what do you suggest? A spiritual retreat? Meditation?" Logan smiled. "How about something simpler? A downstairs coffee? A real dinner? Maybe socialize with people who are not arrogant millionaires like you." Ethan sighed, checking the clock. 15 minutes. "And just because I don't want to hear you complaining about the rest of the day." The two descended through the panoramic elevator, which offered a spectacular view of Times Square. Downstairs, lights flashed, tourists took pictures, and giant signs announced from Broadway shows to new technological gadgets, some created by Ethan's own company. But none of this really impressed him more. What could? He already had everything. Or at least, that's what he tried to believe. Across the building, Charlie Hayes balanced a tray full of wine cups while dodging distracted customers in the sophisticated ground-floor restaurant. The hall was packed, as always. People in deer suit talked about actions and investments as she ran from side to side, ignored, invisible. Sophie Turner, her best friend and co-worker, appeared beside her with a tired smile. "If I hear one more, bring more wine, dear." From one of those pregnant, "I swear I'll shed the bottle in someone's head." Charlie laughed. "Best not. We need this month's salary, remember?" Sophie rolled her eyes. Yes. But tell me, any news? Any plan to get out of this life?" Charlie sighed, serving a couple who didn't even think. "None. But honestly, I'm tired of worrying about it. Work, pay the bills, repeat. This is my cycle. You can't dream of surviving." Sophie stared at her with a mixture of pity and stubbornness. "You deserve more." Charlie forced a smile. "Perhaps. But more does not pay rent." Sophie was going to answer when a buzz started at the entrance of the restaurant. Two tall and well-dressed men had just entered. One of them had a carefree smile, but it was the other who caught the eye. He was serious, of impeccable posture, and seemed to radiate authority. Sophie poked Charlie. "Look. It looks like we have new bigwigs today." Charlie didn't even look. Another rich customer, another request for expensive coffee or wine. For her, a man like that meant nothing. The restaurant was busy, as always. Muffles mingled with the bowls, as waiters rushed between the tables to serve demanding customers. The newly set coffee aroma mixed with the discreet perfume of polished and leather wood, typical of sophisticated establishments that were part of the routine of entrepreneurs and investors. Ethan Carter entered the hall with calculated steps. Impeccable in his tailored suit. He was used to controlling everything around him, to maintain his strict, indifferent stance. But I was not prepared for that. Her eyes landed on a hurry wait, balancing a tray with wine cups. Charlotte, his body stiffened. The air seemed to leave his lungs for a moment. Charlie was there. The girl he could never forget, the past he believed buried under years of incessant work and countless successful businesses, now moved before him, real, alive. His first instinct was to doubt his own eyes. It couldn't be her. No there. Not after so many years. But it was the same reddish-brown hair, now trapped in a hasty bun, with some loose strands escaping the side of the face. The same determined posture, the eyes attentive to the movement of the hall, the mouth frowned in concentration. But there was something different. Small brands of tiredness on the skin. Slightly curved shoulders. A sparkle in the eyes that was no longer that of the dreamy girl he had met. And then one detail hit him like a cold blade. She didn't look at him, did not stop. Did not hesitate, showed no sign of recognition. Ethan felt a deep discomfort grow in his chest. Did she forget him? His fingers closed over the wristwatch, a nervous tick that he had not allowed himself since college. His world, hitherto solid, structured in numbers and logic, hesitated in the face of that only possibility. Charlie passed by his table, handed a glass of wine to a couple and followed his way without looking at him. As if he were just another client, any face in the crowd. Logan, who had already settled in the chair, realized the change in his friend's expression. What it was? He asked, arising an eyebrow. Ethan took a moment to answer, nothing. But his voice sounded lower than he should. He couldn't push her eyes away from her. Charlie's movement activated sleeping memories, flashes of a hot summer, laughing under a starry sky, her taste at the tip of her lips. Of everything he had lost, your heart hit faster. Why didn't she remember? Logan followed his gaze and frowned. Do you know this waitress? Ethan let out a discreet sigh, letting out his wrist's clock and intertwining his fingers on the table, forcing herself to recover the composure. It doesn't matter, but it mattered. It mattered more than anything he had felt in years. Charlie was still there. But he no longer existed for her, and that, for the first time in a long time, destabilized it. Ethan Carter did not believe in coincidences. Everything in life was the result of choices, strategies, and probabilities. He had built an empire based on this logic. But then, Charlie reappeared. And nothing made sense. Since that day at the restaurant, her mind could not push her image away. The woman he never forgot, who occupied a silent and untouched corner of his memory, was there. So close and at the same time, unreachable. He wanted answers. Didn't she really remember him? Or just pretended? And that's how, for the next 3 days, Ethan Carter, the man who avoided any loss of time with amenities, began to have his coffee at the ground floor restaurant. Charlie walked between the tables with the same efficiency as usual, balancing a tray and a block of orders. He had learned to ignore the eyes of some customers, especially those who saw her as nothing but a faceless employee, but a look, in particular, began to bother her. The first time, he thought it was a coincidence. There were usual customers, businessmen, who came to meetings, CEOs who made the restaurant an extension of the office. But then he came back the next day. And the other, always at the same time. Always sitting on the same table, near the window. There was something in his presence that seemed different. He was not like other customers. I didn't look at her like a simple waiter. Her gaze was intense, heavy, as if trying to see something inside her. Charlie tried to ignore. But each time he turned to his table, his eyes were there, watching her. In a way that made something restless if he shake inside her. She didn't like this feeling. Sophie noticed the discomfort and leaned beside her. The handsome table is keeping an eye on you, he whispered, arising an eyebrow. Charlie sighed. It's just another rich guy who thinks everyone should notice him. Sophie bit her lip, studying Ethan for a moment. Perhaps. But he doesn't look at you like others. He looks like, was trying to remember something. Charlie laughed, shaking her head. Too much drama for an express coffee. Still, the discomfort remained. Ethan noticed the invisible barrier that Charlie raised whenever he approached his table. She was polite but distant. There was no hesitation. No recognition sparked. He needed to know. Black coffee without sugar, he asked, and his voice sounded hoarse than he should. Charlie wrote down the request without even lifting her eyes. But anything else? Ethan leaned slightly, studying every trace of her face. Every detail was so familiar, so painfully the same as what he remembered. But the eyes said nothing. Do you have been working here for a long time? Charlie shrugged. About 2 years. Do you like what you do? She looked up for the first time, lightly frowning her forehead. It's work. The answer, enjoyed it, reached more than it should. Charlie was not like that. He remembered a girl full of dreams, who talked about opening her own coffee shop, about traveling the world, about creating something that was alone. What happened to her? Ethan Leah a little more on the table. Are you from New York? Charlie hesitated a second before answering. Not exactly. I lived a while out. But I've been here for a few years. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. Outside. Far away. Distant from him. The fate had been in charge of putting them back in the same place, but the pieces of the past were all wrong. He wanted to reconstitute them, to understand where everything collapsed, but it was like talking to a Charlie ghost he met. He opened his mouth to continue, but was interrupted by a client calling Charlie at another table. She turned without hesitation. Without even realizing the storm that had just left inside it. Later that night, Ethan loosened his tie and leaned his hands on his apartment's bathroom sink. His head was a mess. Why didn't she remember? He never allowed himself to think that one day Charlie could simply move on without him. Without questions. No resentment. He prepared for hatred. For anger. For anything that came from a reunion, but never for indifference. Ethan closed his eyes and let the memories come back. Her laugh in a small roadside coffee, the way she bit her lip when she was trying to focus. The promise that they would be together, and then the emptiness, the silence that lasted years. He rubbed his face with his hands, trying to push the sense of loss, but failed. Charlie didn't remember him. Or worse. I remembered, but I didn't want to remember. He needed to find out the truth, and I would do that, even if it was the last thing to do. The noise of the city invaded the huge windows of Ethan Carter's office. Times Square shone below, a show of lights and movement. Down, Charlie was probably still serving tables, oblivious to the hurricane that formed inside him. He drummed his fingers on the dark mahogany table, staring at any fixed point on the computer screen. His focus was destroyed. In recent days, he has seen his controlled routine collapse. Before, every minute of your day was calculated. Now he was going down to the restaurant just to watch Charlie. To understand. To find any remnants of the girl he met years ago, but now seemed to be unaware of him completely. Charlie was there, but it was no longer the same. Ethan could not decide what was worse, the possibility that she had really forgotten from him or the fact that he might have chosen to erase every memory. He closed his eyes and the past came without invitation. Flashback 6 years ago, California. The golden sun of California bathed the hot sand. The sound of the breaking waves was mixed with Charlie's light laughter, which ran down the beach, holding the blue dress skirt so as not to let her play the sea. Ethan watched her from afar, his feet sunk in the sand. She was unlike anything he knew. Charlie turned to him, his eyes shining like the ocean behind him. You never enjoy anything. She crossed her arms, pretending to be a serious expression. Come on, get the shoes. Ethan arched an eyebrow. And why would I do that? Because it is impossible to take life seriously in the sand. She took her hand and pulled him, and he went, even knowing that he would never allow himself with anyone else. But Charlie was an exception to everything. He remembered how she smiled when he finally gave in and let the cold water touch his feet. How she held her face in her hands and whispered, I would never get tired of looking at you before kissing him. How he believed, for the first time in a long time, that maybe, just maybe, love was real. The memory disappeared like a wave breaking against the stones, leaving behind only the bitter taste of nostalgia. She forgot all, every laugh, every touch, every promise, and he refused to accept it. It was then that Logan Parker entered the office, cracking his fingers in front of Ethan's face. If you look at this screen for another 5 minutes without flashing, I think your brain will stop. Ethan didn't even look away. I'm busy. Logan snorted and threw herself into the leather chair. Right. Then explain to me what is happening. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Logan leaned forward, crossing his fingers over his knee. A week ago you disappear in the middle of work to have coffee. You hate coffee. Hates busy places. But suddenly find a downstairs restaurant super interesting. Ethan was silent. Logan smiled in the corner. You found someone down there, didn't you? Ethan closed his face. This is not your account. If you're leaving you like this, then, yes. Ethan did not answer. Because Logan was right. After a few seconds, Logan sighed. Ethan, whoever this woman is, you need to ask yourself one thing. Are you prepared to relive whatever you have been poorly resolved? The question was hovering in the air. Because the answer was not simple. He knew what happened between him and Charlie. He knew that if he tried to bring her back to his life, he would need to relive the pain of the moment he was forced to leave her, but something inside him had already decided. He was not ready to see her leave a second time. Charlie was exhausted. The night had been a hell of late orders, impatient customers, and the cooking chief complaining about the heat of the kitchen. She leaned against the counter to get breath when Sophie appeared beside her. Let me guess. Table 4. Charlie rolled her eyes. He came back, and he keeps staring at you as if trying to decipher a puzzle. Charlie took a tray, ignoring the strange feeling that always came when she thought of him. Sophie, he's just another customer. If you say. Charlie didn't answer, but deep down, I knew it was not true. She didn't want to admit, but every time she looked at him, she felt something inexplicable. A weight in the chest. A restlessness. It was a strange feeling, like when you have a name on the tip of your tongue, but it never comes. Charlie shook her head and took the orders, and then, he saw something that made her freeze in place. The table from table 4, the same one who stared at her every day, took off his wallet and left an absurdly high tip on the table, much more than anyone would leave for a simple coffee. Her heart shot. Charlie held the tray harder. Because suddenly that inexplicable feeling seemed to make sense. It was not a forgotten name on the tip of the tongue. He was a ghost of the past, about to reveal herself. The restaurant was especially agitated that morning. It was a meeting day in the building, and dozens of executives crowded the tables, speaking in hasty tones about investments, actions, and millionaire contracts. For Charlie, it was just another ordinary day. Or at least it should be, since he had begun to notice the man at the 4. Ethan Carter, as Sophie discovered by discreetly pending his credit card. Something inside her seemed restless. He was not like other customers. There was something about him. A way of looking at her that looked so personal, so intense, that sometimes she was lacking air, but she didn't have time for foolish thoughts. The tray in his hands was heavy, and his bills would not be paid alone. Here's your coffee, she said. Automatically as she puts her cup in front of him. Thanks, Charlie. She stopped. The sound of his own name coming out of his mouth made a shiver up his spine. It was the first time he said it. Charlie narrowed her eyes, feeling her stomach to turn. Do you know my name? Ethan leaned slightly in the chair. Without haste. You work here. All customers know their name. She frowned, trying to ignore the discomfort she was crawling inside her. It was true. But why did you seem like a lie? Before he could answer, Sophie approached, holding a piece of paper in hand. Charlie, you won't believe it. Charlie turned to her, relieved by distraction. What it was? Sophie extended the paper, the excited smile. Remember the resume you sent to that company in the same building? They called you to an interview. Charlie blinked. What? Sophie nodded. Exactly. You can finally get out of here and have a decent job. Charlie took the paper, the heart fired. It was real. After so long serving tables, perhaps finally had a chance to change life, and for a moment, he allowed himself to dream. Across the table, Ethan Carter closed his hand in hand. He didn't predict that. Charlie took a deep breath before the imposing building. The mirrored skyscraper reflected the blue sky of New York, shining in a way that seemed unattainable. As if that world was not made for people like her, she squeezed the resume in her sweaty hands. But now it was your chance. He entered the building and was directed to the 32nd floor, where it would be his interview for the administrative assistant vacancy. Miss Hayes. The receptionist smiled. You can enter. Charlie straightened the skirt and crossed the door of the meeting room. What she didn't know was that, on the other side of the building, Ethan Carter had just received a notification on her cell phone. A new email. Candidate Charlotte Hayes is on her way to the interview. His blood froze. Charlie was nervous. The man sitting in front of him, Daniel Reed, head of the administrative sector, analyzed his curriculum carefully. You have experience as a waitress, right? She nodded. Yes. But I also studied administration for 2 years before I needed to stop. For financial reasons. Daniel looked up. You know, the administrative assistant work can be quite exhaustive, right? Charlie released a weak laugh. Believe me, Mr. Reed. Nothing can be more exhaustive than a full restaurant. The man smiled. Good point. The interview continued for a few more minutes, until Daniel finally closed the document folder and smiled. You can start on Monday. Charlie widened her eyes. I achieved? Yes. Welcome to Carter Enterprises. Charlie held the emotion. Perhaps your life was finally changing. The elevator slid softly to the 38th floor. Charlie took a deep breath. The office was luxurious, unlike any environment in which he had worked. The employees passed hasty, carrying folders and tablets, the jumps echoing the marble floor. She was introduced to the team and began to set. The work seemed simple, dealing with agendas, organizing documents, answering calls, but then something strange happened. As he walked down the hall, he passed a glazed room and froze. There he was, the man of the table 4. Ethan Carter, but he was not sitting in a restaurant. He was behind a giant table in a luxury office, discussing business with directors and pointing to charts projected on a screen. Charlie felt her mouth dry. He was the CEO. The shock traveled his body. Your stomach rolled. He knew who she was from the beginning, and said nothing. The world around him seemed to spin while the pieces began to fit in, the way he looked at her in the restaurant, the way it seemed interested in it. The absurd tip. Charlie grabbed the paste against her chest, feeling a wave of anger growing inside her. Why didn't he say anything? Why did you pretend to be a stranger? She wanted answers. And I wouldn't leave without them. Charlie's heart beat so strong that she felt the beats reverberating in her ears. Ethan Carter. The name now seemed to carry an overwhelming weight on his chest. He knew, from the first moment he saw her in the restaurant, he knew who she was. And chose the silence. Her hands were shaky as she held the document paste against her chest, her nodes of her fingers whitishing through her squeeze. How could he, the man of table 4, the one who watched her as if he sought something in her, was not just any executive. He was the owner of it all. He was the CEO. She couldn't breathe. The office around him seemed distant, the sounds drowned out of a deaf fury that climbed through his body like a tide. The same fury she buried years ago when he disappeared without a word, the same fury that now burned like fire inside her. Charlie dropped the papers on the table and turned on her heels. She needed answers, and would have them now. Ethan was sitting on his table, his eyes fixed on the monitor, but his mind wandered in a whirlwind of thoughts. Charlie was there, on the same floor as him. Every minute that was going on, he felt his presence, like a ghost who never really left. He had tried to prepare for this. When she saw her name in the selection process, she knew she couldn't stop her. Part of him wanted. But the other part, that one who has never stopped thinking about her even for a second in recent years. I would see her there. Charlie was always stubborn. I always wanted to conquer the world on its own, and now, unknowingly, he had entered the empire he built. The sound of the door abundantly opening, it brought him back to reality. When he looked up, Charlie was standing there. Her expression was a mixture of shock and anger, his eyes sparkling with questions he didn't know if he was ready to answer. She knocked the door behind her, crossing her arms. How long did you intend to hide this from me? Her voice echoed in the office, loaded with unbelief and fury. Ethan took a deep breath. Charlie, you don't dare say my name like that. She stepped forward, the sharp look. You knew. From the first day, since the first time I served that damn coffee for you. Ethan remained motionless, his hands intertwined on the table. Yes, I knew. Charlie felt something break inside her. He didn't even try to deny it, she released. A dry, humor laugh, feeling the bitter taste of disappointment. You saw me, recognized me, and said nothing. Ethan finally got up, pushing the chair back. It wasn't that simple. Charlie narrowed her eyes. Wasn't it so simple? His voice went up, his chest panting. You left me. You just disappeared from my life without a single explanation. Without a word. You destroyed everything. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second. He knew this moment would arrive. I knew that Charlie wouldn't let go unnoticed. He just didn't know how much she hurt to hear it from her. I never wanted to hurt you. Charlie laughed, a laugh loaded with pain and irony. No? She approached his table, resting her hands on the wood, shortening the distance between them. His eyes were two burning embers. So tell me, Ethan Carter. What the hell happened? Ethan felt his self-control fading. She was too close enough for him to feel the subtle perfume that was still the same. Close enough to make his bare breath cause something visceral inside him. He closed his hands. In his hand beside his body, as if that would prevent him from doing something impulsive. Telling the truth was a risk, but keep hiding, this could cost the last chance he would have with her. You wouldn't understand. Charlie waged her jaw, her eyes filled with contained tears. So make me understand. The silence between the two was a battlefield. The air was heavy, loaded with everything that has not been said in recent years. Charlie blinked, looking away for a second. I waited for you. His voice came out lower, and that hit him more than any scream. For months. For years. I expected you to come back, to give me an explanation. Ethan felt a suffocation in the chest. She waited for him and he never came back. He swallowed dry. But the door opened before he could end. Ethan, I need to talk to you. Logan Parker stopped in the middle of the sentence as he saw Charlie standing before Ethan's table, his teary eyes, the angry anger in the whole body. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Logan's eyes widened slightly. Charlie. He recognized her instantly, and then something went through his expression. Blame. Charlie realized. She looked at Logan and then to Ethan, her heart firing on alert. Did you tell him? Ethan remained silent. Her stomach rolled. Logan knew. My God. Charlie stepped back, as if he had punched. Everyone knew. Less me. Ethan turned around the table, instinctively trying to approach her. Charlie, listen to me. But she raised her hand, interrupting him. Her eyes, which once burned with anger, were now taken by pain. I was a joke for you all this time. Ethan felt the floor disappear under his feet. No. Never, but it was too late. Charlie took another step back, as if he moved away from him was the only defense he had. She felt the bile rise through the throat, the pain being replaced by pure contempt. You are unbelievable. And then, without expecting any further explanation, she turned on her heels and left, knocking the door behind her. The silence that was in the office was deafening. Ethan closed his eyes, slowly releasing the air. Charlie hated him now, and maybe he deserved it. Charlie still felt the anger throbbing in her veins. She tried to ignore him. He tried to pretend Ethan Carter was just another name on the payroll, which he was just an unreachable and distant CEO. But it was impossible. The truth was now a shadow that followed her. Ethan knew who she was. From the beginning. From the first day she entered the restaurant and looked at her that way, and he said nothing. Charlie wanted to hate him. She hated. Or at least, I wanted to believe it. Hated, because deep down, behind all that hurt, there was something worse than hatred, the pain than it could have been. What would have happened if Ethan had not disappeared, if he had stayed, if she had never spent clear nights wondering why it wasn't good enough for him to at least give an explanation? The past burned like acid inside it. And she needed answers. The office was silent when Charlie came in. It shouldn't be there, but it didn't care. The door was ajar and, before he could contain herself, heard Logan's voice. Ethan, you need to tell her. Charlie froze, his hand on the doorway trembled. Ethan's voice came lower, hoarse. Do you think she wants to hear? After all, Charlie arrested her breath. Logan sighed. If you don't tell you, I tell you. The silence that came later was so heavy that Charlie felt as if her own heart had stopped. She pressed herself against the wall, unable to move away. So Ethan said, and her world collapsed. 6 years ago, California. Ethan squeezed the phone hard, the tense body. I already said. I won't do that. The cold voice on the other end of the line belonged to his father. He is going. Yes. You have a responsibility, Ethan. The company needs you. Ethan ran a hand over his hair, frustrated. I'm not the only heir. You can call anyone else to take over. I don't want someone else. I want you. I don't want this life. The father's laugh was dry, without humor. Do you have a choice? Ethan closed his eyes. He didn't have. The father's voice came sharper. You can keep playing love with this girl, or it can be someone. Ethan felt the fury grow. Don't talk about it like that. She is not part of this world. Ethan knew that. But it didn't care. Your father sighed. If you don't end it now, she'll suffer. We will guarantee that. And then, Ethan knew Charlie would never be safe beside him. Not while he was a Carter. The next morning, without saying a word, he left and never looked back. Charlie took her hand to her mouth, trying to contain the hiccup she climbed through her throat. His chest squeezed as if a gigantic weight crushed him. Ethan didn't abandon her because she wanted to. He was obliged. He was forced to choose between her and an empire he never asked. She turned, pressing her hands against the temples. If he had told the truth, she would have fought. But now all that was left were the wreckage of what they were once, and a single question hammered in his mind: would she be able to forgive him? Charlie stared at the computer screen, but the words in her email were blurred, as if her brain simply turned off. She blinked a few times, trying to focus. I couldn't. It made nothing sense now. She walked away from the table, taking a deep breath, trying to recover control of her own thoughts. But how could you, after what you had heard the night before? Ethan never wanted to leave her. He was forced to choose between her and an empire. He was threatened. He suffered as much as she. Charlie pressed her hands against her face. Everything inside her was at war. Ethan was lying all this time, but not the way she thought. He didn't forget her. He protected her. So why did the resentment still burn inside it? Why couldn't you just forgive him, Charlie? Sophie's voice took her out of her trance. Charlie blinked, returning to the present. What? Sophie leaned against the table, crossing her arms. You have been facing this email for 5 minutes like exploding. Charlie released the air slowly. I'm tired. Sophie frowned, studying her. Does this have to do with the beautiful CEO? Charlie closed her eyes for a moment. I don't want to talk about it. Sophie sighed, but didn't insist. All good. But if you want to get out of your own head for a few hours, you can help me choose a dress for the company's gala event. Charlie looked up. What? Carter Enterprises gala party. Did you forget? Charlie blinked. She had really forgotten. I don't know if I want to go. Sophie rolled her eyes. You have no choice. All employees are required to attend. Charlie sighed. The last thing I wanted was to spend the night surrounded by arrogant millionaires, and especially Ethan Carter. But she had no choice. The night was cold, but New York shone under the plaza's golden lights. The main hall was impeccable, decorated with crystal chandeliers and elegantly tidy tables. Ethan was in the center of everything, surrounded by investors, handshakes, and champagne cups. But his mind was elsewhere. Charlie would be there. Since he learned of the confirmation of his presence, he has felt a knot in his throat. Because this time he could not avoid it, and when she finally appeared, Ethan realized she was never really prepared for it. Charlie was stunning. She wore a long blue dress with fluid fabric that embraced her curves in a subtle way. The hair, which was usually trapped in a careless bun during hours, now fell into gentle waves on the shoulders, but it was not just his appearance that left him without air. It was the way she walked, unlike Charlie he met, always spontaneous and carefree. Now she had a reserved air, an invisible armor that shouted that she wouldn't let anyone really approach, especially him. When your eyes met on the other side of the hall, something happened. The world seemed to dissolve, the guests disappeared. The buzz of conversations, the soft chords of music, has become an insignificant background. There was only Charlie and Ethan, but then she looked away and turned, walking in the opposite direction, and it was at this moment that Ethan knew he couldn't let her go. Not this time. He ordered the investor's permit and crossed the hall without hesitation. Charlie was taking a glass of wine when she felt a presence behind her. His body was tense before he even heard his voice. You look beautiful. The hoarse and severe tone made a shiver up his spine. She turned slowly, and there he was, the man who made her feel everything and destroy everything, the man who now she knew she suffered as much as she, the man she didn't know yet could forgive. Thank you, he said, his voice controlled. Ethan did not look away. We need to talk. Charlie forced an empty smile. We have nothing to talk to. You know we have. She squeezed the cup harder. You have already omitted me too much. What else do you want to hide, Ethan? His eyes darkened. I never wanted to hide anything from you. But hid. Her voice became firmer. For years. You decided that I didn't need to know what happened. You took me the right to choose. Ethan took a deep breath, fighting the pain that grew inside him. I did what I thought was right at the time. Charlie released a mood without mood. And now? Do you think you can simply appear and wait for everything to be like before? Ethan felt a knot squeeze his throat. I just want a chance. Charlie's heart hesitated. She knew he was being sincere, but knowing that didn't make the pain leave. I can't, Ethan. His eyes sought hers, desperate. Can't or don't you want to? Charlie felt the pressure on her chest. She wanted. God, as I wanted, but the fear of being hurt again was greater. She turned to leave, but then Ethan held his hand. The touch was electric. Charlie's eyes widened, and when he turned to face him, Ethan was there, not like the powerful CEO, not like the untouchable man she saw in the office, but as the boy who held his hand in California and made her believe in love. His eyes said it all. I never stopped loving you. Charlie felt her heart plummet. She released his hand, took a step back, and then, with a trembling voice, he said, I don't know if I can do it again, and left. Ethan stood there, watching her disappear through the hall. And for the first time, fear hit him hard that he was about to lose her forever. The city never slept, but Charlie felt that the world around her was suspended. At least, the world inside it. She wanted to move on, she wanted to ignore him, but the truth was cruelly simple. Ethan Carter did not come out of his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his eyes on the night of the gala event. The silent brightness of supplication. The fear of losing it. The pain that mirrored hers, and that consumed her, because, as much as I tried, he could no longer be convinced that he did not love him. Not after knowing the truth, not after understanding that all this time he also suffered. Ethan stared at the computer screen, but his mind was miles away. In Charlie, since the event, she didn't talk to him. It did not answer your calls. I didn't look at him in the office. She was moving away. And he knew that this time she wouldn't come back, unless he did something. It was then that he made his decision. With a deep sigh, he took the phone. Cancel the meeting with London investors. The assistant on the other end of the line hesitated. Mr. Carter, this agreement can yield billions. Cancel. Pressed the button and hung up. The decision was made. He would lose an empire, but would not lose Charlie again. Charlie was about to leave when she heard a voice behind her. Charlie, wait. Your body froze. She closed her eyes for a moment before turning around, and there he was, the intense eyes, the chest rising and descending as if it had run to reach it. But there was something different, something in the way he looked at her. As if something had changed. Charlie crossed her arms, trying to keep the guard. What do you want, Ethan? He hesitated for a moment, and then stepped forward. I canceled the trip to London. Charlie frowned, and Ethan gave a small smile. Sad, this agreement was worth more than $1 billion. But I couldn't get into that plane. Her heart hit faster. Why? He held her eyes. Because I realized that there is not a single billion in the world that is worth more than you. Her breath failed. For a moment, everything seemed to dissolve around. Ethan Carter, the man she thought of having lost forever, was there. Choosing her. Charlie felt her eyes fill with tears. You can't simply give up everything for me, Ethan. He shook his head. I didn't give up on everything, Charlie. I finally chose what really matters. Charlie released the air slowly. Her heart pulsed hard. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe. And then Ethan took the last step. He held her face delicately. Charlie gasped. His touch was hot, firm, familiar, the touch of someone who should never have left. And then he whispered, let me prove that I won't go anywhere anymore. Charlie felt the last barrier inside her get rid of it. Reason said it should resist. But her heart, oh, her heart had already made the choice for her. She closed her eyes, and then he surrendered. Ethan's lips found hers in a slow, intense kiss loaded with years of longing. Times Square lights shone around them as silent witnesses of what was always fate. And at that moment, under the sky of New York, Ethan and Charlie finally found the way back to each other. The plate at the entrance still smelled the fresh paint. Charlotte's Cafe, name designed with elegant lyrics, shone in the morning light of New York, just as Charlie always dreamed. The window glass was impeccable, reflecting the busy sidewalk of the city that never slept. Within the small space, the fresh coffee aroma mingled with the smooth smell of newly baked bread, creating a welcoming, intimate, yours. Charlie was behind the counter, straightening the last details of the showcase when she felt a shiver traveling her skin. She knew he was there even before he turned. Ethan Carter leaned on the doorway, watching her with a corner smile, that smile that still had the power to completely disarm her. It's perfect, he said, his eyes traveling every detail of the coffee. Charlie smiled, crossing her arms. You haven't even proved anything yet. Ethan stepped ahead, hands in his pockets, his perfectly aligned suit. I don't need to prove it. If you did it, then it's perfect. Charlie rolled her eyes, but the smile didn't leave her lips. You have always been good with beautiful words. Ethan tilted his head, approaching until only the counter separated them. No. He lowered his voice. I'm just good with you. Charlie's heart hesitated. Because it was true. He made her wait, made her heart break so many times. But in the end, he was also the only one. He always knew how to rebuild him. Charlie took a deep breath and took a cup. So Mr. Carter, as a busy CEO and a millionaire, tell me. Do you have time for a coffee? Ethan supported his elbows on the counter, leaning slightly toward him. For you? Always. Charlie tried to hold her smile, but failed miserably. She filled the cup with hot coffee and handed it to him. Ethan took the cup with one hand and, with the other, held hers, intertwining his fingers. Charlie felt the warmth of his touch through his skin. Thanks for waiting for me, Ethan murmured. Her eyes softened. Thank you for coming back. New York seemed different that night. Or maybe it was them who were different. Ethan and Charlie walked side by side, their hands interlated, mixed with the crowd of hasty people. But they were not hurried. For the first time, there was no hurry. The cold town wind blown slightly, shaking the loose strands of Charlie's hair. But she didn't bother. Ethan pulled her closer, passing an arm around his shoulders. She sighed, leaning Against him, they were exactly where they should be. No secrets, without fear, only together. Are you still afraid that I disappear? Ethan asked, his voice hoarse against the wind. Charlie closed her eyes for a moment before answering. No. Ethan stopped walking. Charlie turned to him confused, but before he could ask anything, he held his face with both hands and kissed her. It was a different kiss from everyone else. There was no hurry, there was no urgency, there was no pain, there was only certainty that they belonged to each other. When they broke up, Ethan smiled. Good. Because I won't go anywhere. Charlie felt something hot spread inside her, and as they walked under the Square Times lights, she knew it was true. They had finally found the way home, together, forever. Our story for today comes to an end, friends, but before we say goodbye, I need your help to keep this rhythm of stories alive. If this story moved, inspired, or simply entertained you, don't hesitate to give this video a like. It's as simple as a click, but it means the world to us. Do you want more stories like this one? Then subscribe to Happiness of Love and don't forget to activate the notification bell so you never miss any of our new adventures. Remember, we have a new video every 2 days. Share this video with your friends and family. Who knows? You might inspire someone to make a positive change in the world. Leave us a comment letting us know which part of the story touched your heart the most. We love reading your thoughts and connecting with you. And if you're watching this on your phone, don't forget to hit the hype button to show your enthusiasm and help us reach even more people with these inspiring stories. Thank you for being part of the Happiness of Love community. Your support is like the heartbeat of this channel, vital and full of life. Oh, and before you go, check out the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another amazing story you won't want to miss. See you in 2 days with another story that will take your breath away. Until then, keep the rhythm of love and inspiration alive, one beat at a time.